Hi there, as I sit down to edit this video, finally for the last in my series of 12 journals of 2016, and we are in 2017, and that's when I noticed my huge error at putting this together. You can see that I've made my covers for my 2016 journal with 2017 on it, and I am in the process of fixing that right now. And I thought I would take it off, and I thought I wouldn't admit to making this mistake, but it was all part and parcel of this huge journey to get this finished, because I have had terrible trouble with my computer, and that's why I'm late. So apologies for anyone that's been waiting to see me finally finish my 2016 journal. And it will say 2016, I promise, and I'll show you the photographs at the end. I'm going to sort of fix it while I'm editing so that things dry and that I get hopefully a seamless transition from 2017 to 2016. So my computer's been in the menders, so I've been trying to video and store that video in different places until I'm ready to edit it. So I have actually got the beginnings of the next journal ready to edit. So I thought I'd put up this first, and I may well put up a little run through video of everything that's in the journal once this is finished, but then I will move on to my 2017 journal. So apologies for those of you that have been waiting to put this together, but I hope that you'll enjoy this binding technique, and you'll be able to do this for any of your sort of journal pages that you want to include in a journal in the future. So it's quite a good way of making a cover for any kind of mini album. So these are the dimensions for my particular journal. These can be changed depending on what size journal pages you want to use. So I've got a front and a back at 6¼ inches by 7½ inches, and my spine is dependent on the thickness of my book. Now I did tell you that I am making two journals, or putting this into two journal covers because of how thick it is. This was half a year. So the spine for one of my volumes is 7½ by 2¼ and the other volume will be slightly different. So it's a case of measuring the depth of your book, and I just gave it a little bit of leeway in the fact that I increased the size just by about 1/8 of an inch. So you can see that that's a 1/16 on each side of what I could measure my spine. Not my spine, my book spine. So that's the first thing that you're going to need to do. You're going to determine the size of the spine of your book, and you can see that this one's come together a little bit narrower, so therefore I can just decrease the measurement of the spine for this one. The width measurement. The length measurement stays the same, all the pages are the same height. It's just the width measurement you might need to just alter slightly. Now, to ensure that the spines of my books, or the hinges of the spines of my books, are sturdy and robust, I like to use a sticky back canvas. You could use a canvas that isn't sticky backed if you wanted to, or a strong fabric, and you could use something like a book binding glue. Now, one thing that I will say as I do this, you will notice from the photographs of the spine of the book that you can see where this tape ends. And what I should have done was use one piece of sticky back canvas to cover the whole of the spine, and that way I would have only had the edge of the canvas showing on the fronts and backs of the book instead of down the centre of the spine as well. So I would change that slightly if I were to do that again. I was being a little bit thrifty and never really thought about the fact that the dimension of the tape will actually be seen on the front of the book. So I'm just joining this together, and I'm leaving roughly one width of chipboard between the spine and either the front or the back cover. I like to use a bone folder and make sure this is really stuck down well, and I seem to have a little bit of paper on here. So just getting rid of that, and then I can stick this down. So I used a spare piece of the chipboard to make sure that the gap that I left between the spine and the what will become the back or front of the book was even, and the chipboard that I'm using is probably just slightly under 2mm thick. It's quite a thick chipboard. You could use a slightly thinner one if you wanted to. So I'm going to do that for the opposite side, again using a spare bit of chipboard just to make sure everything is straight, and make sure the line top and bottom runs evenly as well, and then you can join the two together with your sticky back canvas strip. So I've made it slightly longer than the spine of the book so I can wrap it over onto the other side. Now you can see here that gap that I've got in the spine is going to show when I start to create the texture on the cover itself. So if I'd done it again, I would have done this in one piece, and therefore I wouldn't have that channel down the centre of the spine. Make sure you burnish that well, and then just test your volume on the inside. You should be protecting all the ends of your tags as well as fitting the width of the spine of the book. And then because this was originally going to be one volume, I'm just removing those cardboard strips that would have created a pocket if the whole book had been joined together, so that that top area is flat. I'm not going to do it from the bottom because that is going to form a pocket for that final page, but I'm just going to make sure that I can join this flat to the actual book itself. And I had a little bit of difficulty working out how to join this, but this ensures that when I cover this area and tidy this up with a lovely pattern paper, that everything is nice and flat. So a couple of tips about cutting your chipboard and making sure everything is square. I like to use my paper trimmer to just mark out the dimensions of where I'm going to cut. So if I'm cutting, for instance, the cover, I'm going to measure the depth or the height of the cover, and then I'm just going to lightly run that scoring blade down the chipboard. I'm not trying to cut through, I'm just giving myself a guide that I know is straight because I've used the paper trimmer to ensure that it's straight, and then I'm going to cut along that line using a metal edge ruler and a sharp craft knife. Again, don't try to cut through this all in one go. I suggest if you've not done this before, then the ruler or metal edged ruler is the correct way to go to make sure that you get a nice cut and that you don't slip. But because I've cut so much chipboard, and I'm not saying that I don't ever slip, but I find that I can run my craft knife along that groove, and I'm just pressing quite firmly but not trying to cut through all in one go. And the more you cut the channel, obviously the less likely your knife is to slip out of it. And I keep going until I can remove that piece. And that's how I cut my chipboard. Now if you've got a really strong guillotine, of course you could use a guillotine to cut your chipboard quite easily, but you need quite a sturdy guillotine in order to do that. Now I've had this canvas product in my stash for quite some time, so I'm not 100% sure if it's still available, but I would imagine that it is. So this is a Claudine Helmuth Studio sticky backed canvas, and I'm just going to cut a few more strips because at this point I hadn't realised that I'd have been better off cutting one strip, and I'm going to use some extra strips to reinforce the inside of the spine, just to make doubly sure that everything's going to work well. I've got the flexibility of the canvas and the strength of the canvas to make sure that however many times you open and close your book, after all that hard work, it's going to stay together. And as the inside is going to be completely covered by pattern paper, it really doesn't matter how many strips that you have on the inside. And then you can place that just to reinforce that area of the spine. And I'm going to do that for both pieces, or both sides of the spine. I have used this technique before to add texture to a cover, and I really like the way it works, and it's a messy technique, but it's really nice to create some interesting texture without too much, without it being too busy, I think is the terminology I'm looking for. So first of all, because this is chipboard, it soaks up any mediums you put on it quite quickly, and I want to make sure that I really do get a good bond between the tissue layer I'm going to apply and the chipboard cover. So I'm starting out by just laying down a layer of the matte multi-medium all over the cover, ready to except the tissue. So that way it does stay nice and wet, which is what I want, rather than immediately start to dry, which the first layer does. So this is sort of the second layer, making sure it's nice and moist, and I've got some tissue that I've crinkled up, and I'm not going to try and flatten out those crinkles, and I'm just going to press them down gently with my fingertips first, and then I'm going to lightly brush over the top with my paintbrush. I say lightly because if your tissue is thin, as you can see mine is here, you can tear it, but I am going to use 2 layers, so I'm not too worried at this stage. If I've got a couple of holes, it will just add to the texture. So, and then you are going to be wrapping all the extra bits over to the other side, but for now we're going to add our second layer of tissue. Again, making sure there are plenty of crinkles within, and then pressing them down on that matte multi-medium. And you can see I've got plenty of nice crinkles going on, and then I'm being a little bit more delicate this time with my paintbrush and making sure that I get another layer of that matte multi-medium on the top of the tissue. So this tissue will be well and truly stuck down all over the front and back covers of this book. At this point you need to let your tissue paper dry before you tidy up the edges. And then once it's dry you can roughly trim out, so I've left between 1 inch and ½ inch depending on what I had left over, all the way around the book, and I'm going to glue that into position on the inside of the cover. So again, more matte multi-medium, laying down a layer, and I'm just trimming off the corners as we would normally, just to avoid a little bit of bulk gathering at the corner points, but not much of this is going to show. I just want it to wrap over and cover the edges of the book. Now if you haven't glued your tissue paper together you might be able to do this a layer at a time, but you can see it wasn't to be for me, and it really doesn't matter. It's just a case of securing that onto the inside and making sure it's really stuck down well. And you're going to work your way around all the edges of your cover, or 2 covers in my case. So now everything is dry and I'm ready to attach the numbers and title of this journal. So I've raided my store of letter stickers, and I happen to have plenty of numbers, funnily enough. These are a set of thickers, and I've gone for the thicker letters in my collection, and that means they'll stand out proud from the background texture. So obviously I should have been looking for 2016, but I'm going to be, for some reason, I have already transferred to 2017. Now you may well think that you want to make this journal yourself. If you come across this video sometime in the future and you've had a look at a few of the pages and seen the cover, then you could make this journal all day long for anything, actually, art journaling, or use it as a scrapbook. So it's quite versatile. So you could have a look at how I've made the pages, have a look at how I've joined it into the book, and have a look at how I made the cover. So you'll be able to make a mini journal, whether it be an art journal or a scrapbook, anytime you want from any of these videos. So you only really need to watch 1 page video to find out how that page is structured, and you only really need to watch this cover video if you want to make a journal all from your own inspiration. And this is a set of letters from Tim Holtz, and these are more current. You're more likely to be able to get your hands on these, but there's so many thickers I know out there that any style of font would work for this journal. So I went for a larger font for the title, and then using these smaller letters. And I was trying to work out how I was going to write along the spine, and I wanted to actually have the fact that there was a part 1 and a part 2 of this journal on the spine as well. So just checking that I've got the right letters, And then I've decided to put a part 1 and a part 2 as well as the year on the spine. Now the next thing you're going to need to do is check your layout, decide where you want it. You could have it in the top right hand corner if you wanted to, but I'm going for central on the front, and then I'm going to have 2 rows top and bottom with the part 2 and the year on the spine. So now it's a case of making sure that everything is lined up nicely before you start to glue it down. And you can use your ruler to get your letters straight, and I'm also using my ruler just to centralise. So that's my centre point on my front cover, and then I'm going to position the letters around that centre point and then use the ruler to make sure that everything is straight. And I will use the ruler as I glue these into position. So I'm hoping to have the 2017 as wide as the word journal. I'm just spreading the letters out a little bit more here. I thought they were a little bit cramped, and making sure they're evenly spaced on the outside. And then I'm going to position the first and last letter of, or number of the year, the wrong year, and that will space out exactly the same as the width of the word journal. Again, I'm going to be quite quick in adding the glue so that I can then have a little bit of time just to make sure that all those letters go back where I had them originally and sit nicely in a straight line. Again, using the ruler, make sure that all the tops are lined up and making sure the numbers are fairly evenly positioned. Then I decided my spine was wide enough to have the year and the part number so that you can read them without having to turn your head to the side. So again, I'm just going to make sure that they're spaced evenly on the spine, and I'm kind of putting them in the middle of the gap that's top and bottom of the cover title. Now remember that when you do your second volume, if you have a second volume, you'll need to sort of line these up, because if they're stood next to each other on a shelf, you want the spines and the covers of your second volume to match the positioning, or the titles to match the positioning on your second volume. So I've got 2 journals that match, and when they're on the shelves the spine will match too. I've added a wooden butterfly for a little bit of extra prettiness and interest, and we're ready to start getting messy with the paint. Make sure your glue's dry first and that everything's stuck down, but it's not the end of the world if you do flick off one of your elements. You can always stick it back on again as you carry on painting. So it's time to get your gesso out and give the whole cover 2 coats. 2 coats in total, just to make sure that those letters are nice and covered, because they're very dark, obviously, compared to the rest of the journal. And the journal is going to be kind of self-coloured, so one colour. So I'm going for green because that's my favourite, and you can use any colour you want really, but I'm starting out by just evening all the tones, so the grey of the chipboard will be also masked by the white gesso as well as the black letters, so just making everything more or less the same colour. I used 2 coats and then I went over the letters again, so just make sure you get into all the nooks and crannies, and don't forget to flip the journal over once everything is dry and just cover the inside section. Check in all the edges are also covered, and then I'm going to cover the tissue on the inside. And although this is covered with paper, there's a little section that shows, so this makes sure that everything matches. So drying in between the layers with my heat gun, and then going on with coat number 2. So making sure it's all dry and on with coat number 2. So now it's time to get messy with the paint, and you're going to need a little bit of kitchen roll and a few baby wipes in order to work this technique. So if you really are somebody that doesn't like to get their hands dirty, this might not be the technique for you, but it really is nice when it's finished. So it's a case of being brave and feeling confident that the end result is worth the mess. So whichever colour you choose to work with, I've got one shade of green that's slightly lighter than the final colour or the top coat that I'll be using. And again, it's just a case of adding a layer of that colour all over your journal. Now, if you're in a very warm room, you might want to do this in sections, say the front first, and then the spine, and then the back cover. But it's fairly cool here today, or it was when I did this, so I worked quickly to cover every area, including the sides of the journal, and then I started to remove that paint. So I've got a baby wipe, and my mission here is to lighten the background so that it's not white anymore but a paler green. So I'm removing the majority of the paint really and lightening this right up. So you can see as I start to wipe, you start to reveal texture. And I'm really not trying completely to reveal the texture here, nor am I trying to be really neat about what I'm doing. I literally am just trying to get a pale green cover at this stage. So you'll find the point at changing your baby wipe is when you're adding the colour back on to your project. So once I got to this stage, I was concentrating on getting an even colour tone across the entire piece. So you can see I've really lightened this back up and taken a lot of that paint off. Now that's really just to get rid of the white at this point, and you want to repeat that process on the inside. Then make sure everything is dry before moving on to the next step. So I've got that first layer dry, and now I'm going to go in with my darker green. So I'm going over the entire journal once again. You can do this in sections if you feel a little bit more confident doing it that way. Making sure the sides are covered. You can see I'm not being precise at all, and this time I'm going to be really gentle with my baby wipe because I do want to maintain texture. So you can see where the tissue is crinkled, it becomes much lighter than other areas, and I'm really very lightly going over this. So they get lots of interest with the depth of the colour that collects around your numbers. And you can see here what I meant about the spine, where I've got that channel. It would have been better if that was one piece, but I can live with that, so I'll live and learn, and I won't do it next time. And then again, it's a case of drying everything off. So at this stage, things look a little bit patchy, and I found the best way to smooth things out without detracting too much from the texture and shading that you've been creating is to give this a light wash of gesso. So literally I'm mixing a little bit of gesso with some water, and then I'm dabbing it off with my baby wipe. So just to lighten things, and it kind of smooths things out. And I like the sort of cloudy colour or chalky look that you get when you give everything a wash of gesso at the end. And I'm going to be doing exactly the same on the inside to bring the colours up to match the same as the outside. Including that final wash of gesso. And I'm just looking at the lovely mess that I'm creating on my scratch paper, as well as it looks like I'm creating a big mess on my cover as well. But you will see it will all be right in the end. Don't forget to pay attention to those edges, particularly if you want them to match and not be slightly darker than the rest of your book. So then I'm taking my baby wipe and just giving this a good general polish over the top, and then I'm going to take my finger, pat off the gesso, not have too much gesso on my hand, which I did then, or on my finger, and then I'm going to highlight the numbers. So have a baby wipe handy in case you hit the book itself by mistake, and then pat over the raised areas of your design. So whatever title you've got on your journal or mini scrapbook album. I'm not trying to cover this completely. I don't mind it being patchy, hence me using my finger to tap the colour on, but I don't want it on the rest of the book, so I'm just brushing that off as I go. And that just highlights everything nicely. And then the last thing that I want to do is just to create a piece, or a kind of, it's got a name when you do it with photos, it's almost like a frame, a blurred frame around the edge. And I'm doing that with my Pitt Big Brush Marker. This is a Faber-Castell product. It's permanent when it's dry, but while it's wet you can smudge it, as you can see I'm doing here with my fingertips, and create an oval shape on the front cover. So I'm going around the edges and then rounding off the corners. And that just gives a little bit of extra interest and frames the title of the book. So I've picked a green that best matches what I've been working with, and then I'm blending that on the front and the back into an oval shape, and then I'm going to go along my edges of the spine. And because the edges are slightly darker on the outside of the cover, I'm going to make that match on the inside again. I'm not trying to round any corners, just the piece that will show once this is covered on the inside, and also taking that green right around the edges. Again, blending it out with my fingertips. So now it's time to finish off the inside of the journal and attach all the pages. Now I have done this once as a trial run and I did have a few difficulties. It was my intention to attach the book to the spine directly, but then the pages didn't open up very well. I'm not quite sure how to get over that, but I'll be working on my 2016 journal. So the other thing that I just wanted to tell you about was measuring this up. So what I've done is I've measured from the outside edge of the cover to halfway into the spine, and I've measured from top to bottom, and then I've removed 1/2 inch from that measurement, so there'll be a 1/4 inch gap all the way around the pieces of paper as I stick them onto the book to cover it. So I'm not going to give you all the measurements because the chances are you'll be making this for all sorts of different sizes of page. I'm using my PVA glue to attach this to the book, and I'm making sure I particularly have plenty of glue where the edges are and where the spine joins the cover. So plenty of glue, and then I've picked a paper that I like. I've had it for a long time and I've never used it on a scrapbook page, so I thought this would be a nice place to use it. So that I thought it was quite cute paper. It's not something that I use all the time, but I quite like it for this. Completely different to all the pages within, but lovely greens that, like I said, is my favourite colour. So I thought I would use this up. So I'm sticking that page into place, and you can see where my 1/4 inch margin works all the way around. I'm making sure I burnish it down well with my bone folder, and I'm particularly paying attention and pressing slightly into the area where the spine joins the cover, so into the little channel that naturally is created. And again, I'm measuring up a piece for the other half of the journal, and I'm attaching this into place. Making sure it's burnished down well, removing the excess glue before I start that process, and then using my bone folder to make sure it's all burnished into place, in particular down the little valley that's created between the spine and the cover. Now before you start to close this up, let it dry first, because if you try and close it up straight away, the chances are you will pull your paper away from the edge. Okay, so I'm going to show you exactly how I decided to do this. I covered the front page of the journal, and that just gives me plenty of scope for this to open up, and I've created a pocket where the journal joins the book and that final tag sits in place. So that's the thing that I'm going to show you how to do next. And the other thing that I'm going to show you, as well as covering the front and joining the back to the album, I'm also going to be showing you how to cover the spine. So the first thing that I decided to do was just give myself a little bit more room, because this is actually going to join in or on to the back cover. So I'm just adding a couple more card strips just to make this pocket slightly deeper and make it easier for the tag to slide in and out. I thought that the one that I did in the first instance was just a little bit tight, and I could have done with just a little bit more room. So again, I'm just using some 1/4 inch card strips, and I'm just building up the depth of the pocket so the tag slides in and out easier. Then the next thing that I'm going to do is add on and finish off the pocket. So I've got a little piece of green, but you won't actually be able to see it once it is in place. So I've measured just a 1/16 of an inch less than the page itself, so it's not quite to the edge, and it sits directly on top of those paper strips. So then we've formed the pocket ready for the tag to go inside, and we've also formed the base which will be stuck to the back cover of the book. So the next step that we've got to complete is to cover. So I'll just pop that tag in there. That's the final tag in this set of pages. So we need to find a way to cover the spine, but to allow it to have plenty of movement to open and close the book, as well as covering this front section, which actually is not attached to the book. And this is what I came up with. So I've got a concertina sort of spine cover, and then I'm going to attach a sheet of patterned paper to tidy up the front cover or the front page of the book. And the trick with the concertina section is to make it as close fitting to the actual spine of the book as possible. So I measured the spine and added on 1 inch, and then I trimmed it once I had it in place. So it's the height of the pages of the book by the spine of the book plus 1 inch. Then I'm going to concertina it, and I will trim it into the right size once I have started to attach it to the book. And I'm going to score the patterned paper every second score line on my Martha Stewart scoreboard with the paper in the portrait position, and I'm going to flip that piece over and then score the alternate set of scores. So every, I think it's every 1/8 of an inch, and then it's the fiddly task of concertinaing this up. Because we went and scored from the front and the back, it would help you form the mountain and valley folds that you'll need. It's quite a fine and precise concertinaing, and I thought by keeping it fine it would make this quite springy, so that it, when it isn't at full stretch, it will ping back and cover without sagging, and it'll look a little bit tidier along the spine of the book. So this takes a little while, and I'm going backwards and forwards concertinaing this piece. I've left a 1/2 inch piece that's flat at the front and at the back, but I may well add another score if I need to. So I've got interrupted with my tea. I'm coming back in the evening to finish this off. So once you've finished with that, you can test the size of it against your book and decide if you need an extra fold, or whether this is fine the way it is and you can attach it. But first of all, I'm going to attach this to the back of the book, making sure it lines up top and bottom, and then to what will become the front of the book. The back piece will be covered as we stick it into the album. You can see that's nice and tight. My first one was a little bit loose. That's nice and tight, but all that concertina ring will allow this to open nicely. And this final piece before we attach it into position is exactly the same size as my page. I'm just making sure that it doesn't protrude over that front edge and that it matches exactly the size of the page and covers up all the workings. So it's now a nice and neat cover, and it opens without any impediment. And then it's time to attach this into the book. So spend a little bit of time first of all, now your paper is dry on the inside cover, and just relax that spine a little bit. You will find that you'll get some cracking along the edge where the tissue was, but I found that once this is in shape, that settles down, and once you're happy that that's happened, you can go along with your big brush marker and just fill in and neaten up those spine edges. The next thing that I'm going to do is attach the back of the book into the back of the spine, and I'm making sure that this sits neatly against the spine when it's closed and that it's evenly spaced top and bottom inside the book. Then I'm going to spend a little bit of time making sure it's all pressed down well, so by putting my hand on the inside of the book and also by using a bone folder. You can see how neat that is. We've got 2 volumes all ready to sit on a shelf and be a lovely reminder of all the art work that was inspired by Tim Holtz 12 Tags of 2016 challenge. And when I show you the photos at the end, they'll have 2016 and not 2017 written on them. So you can see how wide this would have been if I'd have done this as 1 volume. So I'm happy that I did it as 2. And you could also see there that one of the little zigzag spine covers was a little bit loose than the other. So this is just to make sure that this glues in nicely to the cover. So there you have it, my 2016 journal with artwork and a little bit or a few memories of the year or inspired by the year on the inside. So you can see that it's all labelled up nicely. It's going to be a lovely reminder. I really like this technique for creating texture. Definitely would use a piece of canvas that covered the whole spine next time. And that's the thing about this kind of work. You always find new ways of doing things. It's a case of listening to yourself. I've already found out straight away that I needed to cover that a little bit neater. You can see now how easily this opens, and that the fact that I've concertinaed that paper, it just has plenty of flexibility and opens nicely. So I've got my tags that move in and out of their pockets, and they've all got a memory attached, as well as a picture of the original tag from Tim Holtz that inspired each of these very, very different pages. So that's my 2016 journal finally finished. A few hiccups at the end there with the computer malfunction, but I'm up and running again now, and I hope to catch up with my 2017, definitely 17 this time, journal. This time the inspiration will all come from me. So the next little video will probably be a run through of this entire journal, just for those of you that don't really want to watch all the process videos, but perhaps want a little bit of inspiration for creating a journal of your own. And then I will start by showing you how I'm going to set the pages up for the next journal for 2017 and how the whole thing will run, because I really hope that you will play along with me and make a journal for yourself for 2017 like that one. Oh, quickly I changed it back to 2016. So you can see that I managed to fix the covers without too much hard work, and I think because of the style of it, it worked quite well. Be playing a little bit of catch up, but I'm always going to be working a month behind. So I intend, once I get myself back on an even keel, to be publishing my journal video about the 3rd week of the month. And that way we will have plenty of photographs from the previous month in order to be able to make this a scrapbooking journal as well as an art journal. I want to combine both. I like to do both, and I think that you can use your art pages to display some of the memories that you've had for that year, and that's how I intend to play this, and I really hope that you play along. I hope that you can make journals of your own and you will be able to share them with me, and I will set up an Instagram page, I think is the way I'm going to go, so that we can see each other's pages and gain inspiration from each other as we play along in 2017. So I hope you've enjoyed this series. I look forward to creating with you again very soon. Until next time, thank you for watching. So the first link is to the playlist for this entire series of videos. All the pages, including the covers, will be found at this playlist. I'm also giving you a link to another place where I do mixed media videos, so another playlist not specific to this journal for even more inspiration. And then last but not least, I wanted to share with you some stamping workshops that I run in conjunction with Rubber Dance. So gorgeous Rubber Dance stamps and tuition all in one delicious package full of inspiration to make the most out of the stamps that you buy. This is for the mushroom stamp set. There are 10 videos in total and lots of different things to try. Cards and projects and lots of different ways to use these mushroom stamps. In fact, quite often you won't even realise you're stamping with mushrooms at all. This is a really good way to have online tuition whenever you want it, whenever you need the inspiration to use your stamps. And this one is for the Frosty Friends stamp sets. Again, lots and lots of lovely Christmas tutorials so that you can make the most of your Christmas stamps and perhaps get a head start on next year. Here's the link to my Etsy shop where you can get your hands on those.